can hear me. I'm trying a new piece of technology, so hopefully it works. As always, you're the laboratory rats for all the new technology as we start this and continue this streaming adventure. So, okay, good. So I don't know if the image looks better. Hopefully, instead of using the webcam, it's actually running through the camera we usually use for the recording the class and uploading to YouTube. So I'm hoping this will make it easier to do some other events and stream them as well. So if there's any problems as we go through the night, please let me know. It's all new territory. So okay. Well, to start off, it's good to see everyone. We'll do sort of a rolling start as usual. Hope everyone's doing well. It's good to see so many smiling faces this evening. We're coming up on the 4th of July. So in case I forget at the end, please have a happy and safe and enjoyable Independence Day celebration. It's probably going to be different this year than it has been in years past, given COVID. I don't know what events may be canceled or still going on, but I think most states are on their required use of masks. So make sure you go out with these on and follow the rules. So okay. There's no one nearby, so I can take mine off. So we're going to continue our study of the Awakening of Faith this evening. I had it on screen just a little while ago. I'll put it back up. Some of the titles, when we're reading them in English here, might sound a bit depressing or ominous or very serious. Actually, this part of the text is very hopeful. So I hope you'll find it that to be the case also. So we'll try to go through it slowly. And I think I made sure we budgeted some time for meditation at the end. So I will try to watch the clock in case I go over on that part. So are there any questions before we get started? No? Okay. So I'll put the text back up. Let's see here. There we go. So we're here at the section, the permeation of ignorance. So like I said, it sounds really serious, but actually this section is very hopeful. So when I'm mentioning page numbers, I'm usually going by the PDF page. So page 36 of the actual page, and maybe page 70 of 148 of the entire document. So if that helps people find their spot. And I put my hard copy back on the shelf, so I apologize. I don't have the exact page number for the printed copy. But we'll be starting here, permeation of ignorance. So I'll start reading there. How does the permeation of ignorance give rise to the defiled state and continued uninterrupted? It may be said that on the ground of suchness, the original enlightenment, ignorance, or non-enlightenment appears. Ignorance, the primary cause of the defiled state, permeates into suchness. So actually the text raises a good question here. So how does the permeation give rise to the defiled state and continue uninterrupted? So to simplify this question is, how does this whole process get started anyway? Or maybe better to make it personal, how do we get into this predicament? How did this start if the original nature of the mind is without this defiled state? How is it that we have the defiled state? And the answer here is not as exacting as our minds may want. They're not as exacting as perhaps a Western text would have. So most of us want a very concrete answer. We want a story. We want to know that humanity's, what is humanity's fall from grace? How did we get here? And in maybe typical Buddhist fashion, the answer is going to be it's different for all of us. So the circumstances for how we got here is going to be different from all of us. What's the same is the mechanism. So this text is going to discuss the mechanism, um, but the actual circumstances by which we personally got here will differ. And you might think of it as, how you came to make friends in school. So probably everyone, grade school, elementary, on up, we made friends as we went along. And the mechanism by which we made friends is the same. The circumstances under which we made friends is probably different. We may have moved schools often. We may have had moved classes within a year. Maybe our families moved around. We eventually gravitated toward other people that were like ourselves, classmates that we played with. Maybe we made friends out of necessity. I know I had a certain grade school I attended, and I made friends because I needed people who were tough and who could keep me safe. Yeah. It wasn't always the best neighborhood. So, in different circumstances, I may not have been friends with them, but I made sure I made friends with them for that reason. So, there may have been other, deeper reasons. We shared a similar sadness or happiness. We resonated with them in some way that was deeper than which we resonated with other classmates. So, the reason I give this example is we have a common experience, but the specific way that we maybe came together with those friends, or likewise, the specific way that we're all in this situation called samsara, is slightly different. So, we've had different paths to the same place, but we all walked some path. So part of this text, and I'll put it back on screen here, part of the text here is explaining the mental states that give rise to such things as what's referred to in Sanskrit as the kleshas. So those are the mental states that give rise to jealousy, fear, anger, depression, anxiety, all the sort of disturbing emotions. And this is what's being discussed as ignorance. So if you look, I think looked at in terms of the kleshas, we understand that these disturbing emotions are very powerful. Um, they set off a chain of events when we think of them in terms of jealousy, anger, anxiety, fear, especially. I think we're seeing a lot of fear in the news right now. By virtue of everyone having a video camera in their hand, we see people in fear, and we see sometimes tragedy that results from people in fear, or sometimes on the flip side, fairly outlandish behavior. Um, and this change of events that set off then leads to all sorts of misguided behavior and leaves impressions in what the text is going to tell us is the storehouse consciousness. So those impressions sort of leak out, we could say. And that's part of what's going to be discussed here as the permeation of ignorance. So, as these mental impressions seep out through the mind, we have different experiences that are different from one another. But overall, the text is telling us the mechanism of that process is going to be the same for all of us. So, what is that mechanism? So, the first part is the disturbing emotions kind of ripple out through our consciousness. And the text says it starts with ignorance, which in turn permeates our original consciousness. And once the ripple in the pond is made, it reflects back far into the future. And even to the point that once we've given up the behavior that started the ripple in the pond, we may find that it comes back and affects us in some way in the future. So part of what the text is doing is laying out the framework for this mechanism, for how this functions, so that even once we've gained insight into the function, when those ripples come back, we understand that it's coming back. It's not just that uh, we cease a particular behavior, or we cut off a particular um, practice or habit that's not helpful for us. Um, we may still feel the effects later. So I think there's tons of examples of this, but it could be as I think I like to use social media these days because I hear from people all of the joys of social media. And one of those is oftentimes through whatever algorithm that social media chooses, people that we associated with in the past may pop up into our feed or on our timeline in some way that we don't expect. And we may try to make connections between things happening to us or our current emotional state and why those people become relevant or visible to us. So this happens with me from time to time. I seem to on Facebook have a lot of my grade school classmates who are still there, and out of nowhere, seemingly to me, their stories pop up. Someone I haven't talked to in many decades. So the same thing happens with these kind of mental states. The emotional connection to them may come up when we least expect it. Um, our reaction to things may come up and be surprising to us. So this is a bit more, maybe we could say we're a bit more aware of this in modern times, given modern psychology. And I don't think any of us even have need to have gone through psychotherapy. I think we just absorb it. Modern psychology is sort of part of Western culture at this point. And so we may be aware just generally that things happen. But it's important from a Buddhist standpoint to discuss it from the perspective of a practitioner for a few reasons. You can imagine someone has, renounced lay life. They've gone off to the temple, and they've spent many years in the mountains, and they feel like they've really made progress, and they may be shocked when certain ideas or thoughts come up. This actually came up in the movie Zen. Master Dogen, one of the scenes, is one of the movies we had assigned and we discussed a few weeks ago. So one of the students finds that he's not quite ready to continue in a monastic environment. He's still struggling with sexual desire, and so that comes out in a way that shocks him. So we have the scene in the movie. So these things may come up, and I think part of the reasons why it's mentioned is so we understand the function, also so that we're not surprised by it, but also to know that it's going to happen to all of us. And so for that not to sort of throw us off the path, or to think, as is very common for humans, oh, here I am. I thought I'd made so much progress. What's wrong with me? We tend to blame ourselves for very small things and forget that we're all still working on ourselves. So this is one of the reasons why it's here. The other one is more specific to what I'll call Buddhist mental science, this understanding, so that we understand that this history of those disturbed mental states is maintained in the alaya consciousness, the storehouse consciousness. So that's eventually something that we're going to need to clean out. As I often say, we have to clean out our proverbial garages and attics of all of the accumulated stuff of our lives, and this is where it resides. And if you take a drive through most neighborhoods in America, when on a weekend you'll see the garage door up, you'll see very few cars in the garage and a lot more stuff. And so I think our outward world reflects the inner one very well. So we all have a lot of things to clean out, so to speak. So just so that we're aware of that, so it doesn't throw us off. So the next part of the text starts here. Because of this permeation, a deluded mind results. Because of the deluded mind, deluded thoughts further permeate into ignorance. While the principle of suchness is not yet to be realized, the deluded mind, developing thoughts fashioned in the state of non-enlightenment, predicates erroneously conceived objects of the senses and of the mind. These erroneously conceived objects of the senses and of the mind, the coordinating causes in bringing about the defiled state, permeate into the deluded mind and cause the deluded mind to attach itself to its thoughts to create various evil karma and to undergo all kinds of physical and mental suffering. So just a note on the text in terms of translation. Evil karma, sometimes in our culture, evil has a particular cultural connotation. So I would read that as unhelpful or karma that puts up obstacles or leads us away from the path we're trying to tread rather than having a inherent value judgment on those actions. So not to say that they're overtly evil or overtly good things. That would be contrary actually to the teaching. More that in the context it may be unhelpful for what we're trying to do. So this is a key passage. Is perhaps the best way to understand it is to read it backwards. So reading it, that understanding that it's possible to experience the world, it's possible to have some sense of perceptions and not develop attachment to them. So it is possible, the text is telling us, to perceive the world, move through the world, experience things, have things, but not have attachment to them. To, we could say, drink and not thirst, perhaps, to eat and not feel hungry, to see and not give rise to desire. So the text is reminding us that these are two separate functions. They are two separate processes within the mind. We have a capacity for sensory input, and then we attach to the sensory input we get different value judgments. So initially, we may not think that's the case. We may look at our sensory input and we've never considered the sort of secondary attachment or label of emotion or want or dislike that's attached to them. I think it comes out when, let's say there's something that we strongly dislike and we're surprised to hear someone likes it. This may be happening right now, given goings on in the world. We may have a particular outlook about events in the country, and we may be surprised that there is someone who has a very different outlook, one that we think, any good person shouldn't hold. So whatever that outlook is. So this is part of the text, right? It's part of a way to read this backwards and to understand that our desires and attachment are something that come second. It's something that we've created. It's something that we didn't have initially. There's a time in our lives, if we can think back, when we didn't have such strong attachments or desires to things. Our interests and desires change as we get older. There's definitely things that interest me now that I wasn't interested in when I was very young. And I would probably, my 8-year-old self would be surprised that I don't have as much fun playing G.I. Joe or something as I did then. And she's like, no, of course, you'll still be doing that. What else is there to live for? So these attachments are different. So how we view things and how we take things in, we could say, are qualitatively different. So what do I mean by that? So we have sensory input, and maybe to give a very American perspective, let's say you are the kid who eats their vegetables and are satisfied with the nutrients, and you do not develop an aversion to healthy food, nor do you have an attachment to unhealthy food. That would be unusual, but they exist. It is possible. I don't meet many that give up candy for broccoli, but it can be done. Um, and that is a way of seeing or experiencing the sensory input and not having that secondary value judgment, right? You could see the healthy food as healthy and not as a torture or a special diet that your doctor is telling you to do. So you could see it differently. So the text continues with the permeation of the erroneously conceived objects of the senses and of the mind is of two kinds. One is the permeation that accelerates deluded thoughts, and the other is the permeation that accelerates attachments. So this is actually, I found this interesting to think of how the mind is operating. And it's operating in terms of where your thoughts go. So do your attachments, do your erroneous thoughts, does your misconception of the world around you accelerate towards deluded thoughts, meaning lead to greater misconceptions? So you make one mistake and then it leads you to make a succession of mistaken ideas. Or does it accelerate attachment? So your misconceptions lead to greater attachments. I'll use social media again because I think it's actually quite useful for some of these examples in many ways because you get to see people's thought process reflected very quickly. Where I think 20 years ago we didn't have I hesitate to say the benefit of this example, but we didn't have this operating in our society where everyone's thoughts were reflected out into the universe so fast. So on the acceleration of deluded thoughts, you could have your misconceptions lead to greater misconceptions. We see this when people post something, and for whatever reason we latch onto it because it resonates with our assumptions, our current assumptions and value judgments, and it leads us to make a whole series of mistaken ideas or decisions because our initial input idea was wrong. So we may see currently what I see often on social media. There's a lot of historical information that's floating around that's completely not accurate historically, but people glom onto it, so to speak, because it fits the narrative that they want at the moment. It fits their emotional state at the moment. That's not usually how we study history, right? We don't study history as, well, this part of history is very inconvenient, so we're going to come up with a new narrative so that you just feel good about it. But this is the way we're getting information today. So this is the first example, acceleration of deluded thoughts. The second is the acceleration of attachments. So we have a certain misconception about things. So for example, let's say we have a neutral or poor opinion of someone, and then we see a post on social media that proclaims something even worse about them. And because it matches our existing either neutral position or maybe somewhat negative position, it accelerates our attachment to anger or aversion towards that person. I see this all the time, sadly, with regard to current events and political figures. Rather than debate ideas, people are attacking character. And it often leads to things I hear now that I didn't hear 15, even 10, 20 years ago, which is if people say, well, that person is horrible, I don't care what they have to say. I think a lot of that opinion is based on a lot of false narratives, false information, but we attached to it and accelerates. So given the examples we see in social media, I think it is easier for us to reflect on that process happening. It happens when we're in the workplace, maybe the supervisor or someone else in the chain of command gives out assignments that are burdensome. If we hear something negative about that person, we're more likely to believe it because we already have developed an aversion or one particular emotional state. So this is the kind of mental process that the text is talking to us about here. Okay, I'll go on to the next section. So the permeation of the deluded mind is of two kinds. One is the basic permeation by the activating mind, which causes arhats, pratyekbuddhas, and all bodhisattvas to undergo the suffering of samsara. And the other is the permeation that accelerates the activities of the object discriminating consciousness, and which makes ordinary people suffer from the bondage of their karma. So this is discussing permeation of the deluded mind. It says there's two types. One, the first type, because the mind is so permeated by ignorance, even if you stop polluting, right? So I'll give this example. Even if you stop polluting, and in this case, let's say you're a business owner and you've polluted the area around your business. Even if you stop polluting and flowers are growing from the ground, your mind may still be an EPA Superfund site with contaminated groundwater. And given time, this is going to leach out through a plume and have effects far into the future. So you may not see it on the surface. Things may be very beautiful. You may have put in work to clean up the area and it looks good, but below the surface, there's this aspect lurking. So it gives the example here of the arhats, pratyekbuddhas, and bodhisattvas. Even though they've progressed incredibly far, until we've completely exhausted all of this karma, there's still some residual effect from our past karma. So even the Buddha, during his lifetime, was, while he still had a human body, still experienced the effect of karma from the past. So some stories say that manifested as headaches. So he had headaches, and then as he got older, he still suffered the effects of old age. The Buddha lived, to his 80s, so you could imagine what it would be like to be in your 80s and making your way through life, begging for alms, still teaching people under trees. It would be a difficult existence. You're going to have the typical aches and pains of old age, as well as those exacerbated by being on the road and being exposed to the elements more so than we are in modern society. So this is the first of the permeations, this permeation by the activating mind. The second is to consider what it's like for ordinary people. So the second part of the passage says the object discriminating consciousness, and which makes ordinary people suffer from the bondage of their karma. So for us ordinary people, we've set in motion certain karma that we may suffer the effects of far into the future. And even if we're not externally experiencing anything adverse, we may have internal struggles. So I think this is helpful to keep in mind for a few reasons. Sometimes as humans, we struggle with people who we see outwardly appear to live making a lot of poor decisions or appear to harm or do harm to others. And they seem not to be bothered by those actions. I think part of what the teaching is telling us is they are affected. by those actions. We don't, fully escape anything we're doing. It could manifest as mental anguish, difficulty sleeping, um, all of these things come up. It's also a reminder for all of us that even though we've started the path, we're doing practice, anxiety, fear, um, all sort of different types of internal factors may still come up, even though externally we're sitting in meditation, even though externally we're spending time in the temple or we're spending time in practice. Um, these things still come up. So they still need to be worked through. They still need to be exhausted. So traditionally, when you go to the temple, you'll see a lot of practices, many of which are not practiced as much in the West, like bowing or mantra recitation. And it's understood in more traditional settings that these are karma cleansing practices. So you do something um, intentional to cleanse the karma that you have. And it may not be known to you, it may be unknown, it may come out through these practices, but it's a good way to work on yourself. It's a good way to prepare to do more and deeper work. For a lot of practitioners, it comes up when they are preparing to go into retreat or do more formal study or practice. Suddenly, obstacles will arise. So I've heard from many people, um, those who are retreat staff and those who've gone on retreat themselves. Oftentimes, there is some obstacle that arises, and they're unable to accomplish that goal. A few years ago, I actually heard of a young person from Taiwan who was planning to ordain, and then just before the ordination, they broke their leg, so they're unable to take part in the ceremony due to their hospitalization. So sometimes these obstacles arise in rather unusual ways, and um, maybe should signal to us slow down and reevaluate, and maybe there's some other things that we need to work on before we take the next step. Okay, so the text continues. I'm going to skip the translator's note here. You can go back and read it, but it's pretty self-explanatory. The permeation of the deluded mind is of two kinds. Oops, sorry, I read that one already. The permeation of ignorance are of two kinds. One is the basic permeation, since it can put into operation the activating mind, and the other is the permeation that develops perverse views and attachments, since it can put into operation the object discriminating consciousness. So there's two terms here in quotations, and we've been going sort of section by section, so we may forget where this came from. So in the PDF, page, let's see here, 2728, if you go back several pages, so looking at on the actual document, page 2728, excuse me. This is where these terms were first introduced. And they were introduced there. First, we come across this term activating mind. So it came into the text under section 2, the causes and conditions of humankind being in samsara. And it starts off, the first is called the activating mind, for without being aware of it, it breaks the equilibrium of mind by force of ignorance. So this activating mind concept has been introduced. And if you remember at that time, we discussed it in terms of, or I gave the example of the allegory of the cave from Plato's Republic. And we discussed this text where Plato and Socrates are discussing people chained to a wall in a cave, and all they can see are shadows cast on the wall from a fire burning behind them. and they begin to name and label and categorize the shadows that they see. And for them, the shadows become the reality for these prisoners. So this was the when we were discussing this idea of the activating mind. So this terminology comes back up here again in the text, and it's fair to say, well, what does it mean at this point? So it's discussing here the unenlightened state permeates, or as we've used in the past, perfumes the unenlightened mind, but it also activates it. So because of the presence of the unenlightened mind, or due to the fact that we have ignorance, due to the fact that we conceive of things incorrectly, it can trigger awakening. So I started off saying that the this section has a bit of a serious tone. It starts off with this the permeation of ignorance. It doesn't sound so upbeat or helpful or hopeful, I should say. But the text kind of brings that full circle and says, as much as the um, potential for ignorance to permeate the mind, that permeation also can trigger awakening. It can trigger the enlightened mind. So, because of the presence of the unenlightened mind, or maybe we could say by virtue of the unenlightened state, we have something to make a comparison with. We become dissatisfied with our current existence. We eventually grow tired of the struggle and we want something different. And so we begin to ask questions. Um, I think you can see this in the progression of life. There's probably a stage where you were happy-go-lucky, carefree. Um, young children generally don't ask existential questions, but at some point, probably around the teen years, things get sort of angsty, and we have big questions about our purpose and our presence here. And then we may forget again, and it may show up later in life. But this unenlightened state is, or I should say, has the potential that our dissatisfaction will trigger introspection. And this is one of the benefits of the unenlightened state. So if we were asking ourselves, what's the purpose of ignorance? Is there any point to all of this? Yes, right? The text is saying there's this potential that our current state, our suffering actually triggers or pushes us on to ask these deeper questions. Okay. So then it goes on the flip side from the permeation of ignorance to the permeation of suchness. So the text begins. How does the permeation of suchness give rise to the pure state and continue uninterrupted? It may be said that there is the principle of suchness and it can permeate into ignorance. Through the force of this permeation, suchness causes the deluded mind to loathe the suffering of samsara and to aspire for nirvana. Because this mind, though still deluded, is now possessed with loathing and aspiration, permeates into suchness, in that it induces suchness to manifest itself. Thus, a person comes to believe in his essential nature and to know that what exists is the erroneous activity of the mind and that the world of objects in front of him is non existent, and to practice teachings to free himself from these erroneously conceived world of objects. He knows what is really so, that there is no world of objects in front of him, and therefore, with various devices, he practices courses by which to conform himself to suchness. He will not attach himself to anything, nor give rise to any deluded thoughts. Through the force of this permeation of suchness over a long period of time, his ignorance ceases. Because of the cessation of ignorance, there will be no more rising of the deluded activities of mind. I'll stop there. First, couple notes. I always like to note we run into translation problems. So in the original Chinese, the term is not him or her, it's just person. So the addition of gendered pronouns is a translation artifact. So most Buddhist texts refer to sentient beings, and when they were translated into Chinese, used the ungendered person rather than man versus woman. So um, I just want to point that out because it's not totally accurate. So we'll start there. But here the text traces the effect of suchness, that the original state of mind has the potential to permeate the diluted state of mind. So I'll give you this example. When we experience peace, we gain a new perspective on peace. If we go on vacation, we are able to relax, then we desire the state of relaxation, and we have a totally new perspective on the state of stress or pressure that we may have been under before we went on vacation. And it takes time. The people often say they need a few days just to start to feel relaxed, so their state of anxiety, um, pressure, or stress may be that high. When we reduce that state of stress, we naturally want more of that experience. So we may not want to stay on vacation the entire time, but we want to bring back that feeling to our day-to-day life. We start to, in the vacation example, the days near the end of vacation, people's anxiety starts to go back up because they start to remember all the things they need to do or all the things they will confront when they return. So it's sort of only in the middle where there's this potential period for relaxation. So the text says it very similarly, suchness or the awakened mind, when our true nature leaks over into our day-to-day mind, you could say, we have this experience. So we may have a mini awakening. So once we have that taste, either through practice, meditation, pilgrimage, when I was on Koyasan, I would often meet people who were there on vacation. There seemed to be, the time I was there, a lot of journalists that would come through, travel magazines, TV shows from foreign countries. And I had several of the staff that were just there assisting the main travel writer or journalist. Sometimes the videographer would say that they travel all over the place and it's for them just a job, but after visiting the temple, they felt peace in a way that they hadn't felt before. So we may have this, kind of mini awakening, this glimpse of insight. And the text is saying that when we have that insight, there's the potential that we shift our interest from the thing that was causing us trouble to the thing that we get relief from. So we get a more relaxed state. Um, Another example, when I was at the temple, there was a young man. I don't remember if he was Australian or Canadian, but he alternated as a snowboard instructor and surfing instructor. So in the winter, he would come to Japan and instruct snowboarding. And then in the warmer weather, he would go to other parts of the world and he would teach surfing. And he would say, he thought he had the dream job. What could be better? All he does is what he loves. He surfs and snowboards. And then, in the spring and early fall, maybe when there was no good weather for either one, he would go home and visit family. And he didn't think there could be anything better. But he said the entire time he was engaged in what he thought brought him the most happiness and joy, he had a tremendous amount of anxiety. He couldn't sleep. He would have nightmares. All these things would come up. And so he was realizing that there's a lot of things that he had left undone. And when he came to the temple for those 3 days, he had a different type of quiet. And so his insight was he never really allowed himself downtime. He never really allowed himself quiet. He was either always listening to music, he was always running off to the next job, he was always engaged in teaching. And although he thought that was the thing that gave him the most enjoyment, it was actually causing him a tremendous amount of anxiety. So we may have this example or this experience where we finally get this glimpse or we gain insight, and then that true nature is allowed to come forward and propels us on to a new experience. Okay, so I'll keep reading, going on the text. I'll put that on screen. So maybe I think I left off for here. He will not attach himself to anything, or he will not attach himself to anything, nor give rise to any deluded thoughts. Through the force of this permeation of suchness over a long period of time, his ignorance ceases. Because of the cessation of ignorance, there will be no more arising of the deluded activities of mind. Because of the non-arising of the deluded activities of mind, the world of objects, as previously conceived, ceases to be. Because of the cessation of both the primary cause of ignorance and the coordinating cause, objects, the marks of the defiled mind will all be nullified. This is called gaining nirvana and accomplishing spontaneous acts. Let's see here. Focus on, because of the cessation of both the primary cause and the coordinating cause, the marks of the defiled mind will be nullified. What's meant here is the effect of our engagement in misapprehending reality and causing those kleshas to arise, the fear, anxiety. That's what's nullified. Not that everything ceases to be, so to speak. It's our mistaken ideas of those things cease. So it's a long passage, but the text is actually predicting that ultimately our success is guaranteed. If we are doubting this, the question is asked whether we've actually made the right deposits or created the right foundation. So are we actually practicing, or are we giving lip service to a practice? Are we actually, putting the right things into our consciousness, or are we doing the opposite? Are we doing the basic maintenance to carry forth this resolve? So these are the questions. But I think what's positive here about the text is it's saying ultimately our success is guaranteed. So we'll continue on down. The permeation of suchness into the deluded mind is of two kinds. The first is the permeation into the object discriminating consciousness. Because of this permeation, ordinary people and the Hinayanists come to loathe the suffering of samsara, and thereupon each, according to his capacity, gradually advances toward the highest enlightenment. The text is telling us that suchness, so our insight into the true nature of things, begins to seep into our consciousness, first through one of two doorways. Permeation to what the text calls object discriminating consciousness, which is, I think we've discussed this previously, but the discussion is the basic delusion that we have that there is a permanent self. So we see things as we view the world in reference to me and mine distinctions, and that this sort of differentiation is an illusion from the rest of the world. So this is what puts up a barrier between the world and ourselves. We're always differentiating things from that perspective, me and mine. The result of this is we begin to practice or draw near things that accord with that view, and we distance ourselves from things that don't. So the text here is doing a subtle nod toward the stages of the Bodhisattva path. And the first bhumi, the first stage of the Bodhisattva path, is when we realize the spiritual path, what comes with that is joy. So the first stage is this feeling of joy, that this steady distinction that we're making between things is something that can change, and we feel lighter. And then as we practice, we start to free ourselves from various old habits, and we are freed from these defilements. So we're no longer engaging in the same type of behaviors that got us to where we are now. So we go through all these different stages. So this part of the text is sort of a very subtle nod to those 10 stages. Um, the 10 stages are discussed in the Avatamsaka Sutra in tremendous detail. So I won't go into them right now. It's quite long and detailed there, but it does go through all of the different, and it's truly incredible detail, the different states of mind that we tend to fall into, um, and how those states affect us. And many of them, it really goes much deeper than um, modern Western psychology, and it's really quite amazing. And I'll say that because I'm not a psychologist, but um, some of the behaviors that we may in the Western world pride ourselves on, standing up for ourselves or fighting back or championing certain causes and not letting people walk all over us, this kind of thing, which is quite normal, quote unquote, in society. The Avatamsaka would say if we look more deeply, those behaviors are having an effect on us. Um, when I was going through college, the big thing was learning to market yourself better, which I always thought was odd at the time. So I thought, well, I'm turning myself into a product. This is interesting. Um, but that was the thing to do, was how do you market yourself? How do you sell yourself? How do you get that first job? And there was always an element of it that was not very genuine. Maybe the kindest way I can say it. The way it was presented was never to be too genuine. And those that way of thinking of oneself has an effect. It has an effect on how you see the world, has an effect on how you interact with others, and those more subtle shifts of thinking in mental states have an effect on our mind. And so the Avatamsaka gets into those sort of like very fine granular detail. So I won't belabor that point, but what the awakening of faith is telling us, though, is that we're moving through all these different stages as we go through the spiritual journey. And we're constantly peeling back the layers of the onion and finding new aspects. And so part of the beginning of the awakening of faith is just laying out this foundation so that when you sit down to do practice and new doors open, or we start to open old doors that we thought were closed, we aren't surprised by what we find, or we're not surprised that we will find something. So this is inevitable. So we'll go to the last part that we'll cover tonight before we do some meditation. Two kinds of permeation of suchness into ignorance can be identified. The first is the permeation through manifestation of the essence of suchness, and the second is the permeation through the external influences. The more we have insight into our mind and have experience of our own true nature permeating our current diluted state, the further we progress along the path. So every time we get insight into it, even if we're not changing it, it's just as we see the process happening, then we're taking huge leaps forward. So part of the text here is discussing our going on to complete practice that reflect this understanding and insight. So once we have the understanding and insight, we can actually then engage in practices that help us see it in more detail and then correct those actions that created the mental state. With this acknowledgement of practice, the text is saying we have to move beyond just an intellectual or study of form of insight into understanding. And the way to bring that about is through practice and experience-based understanding. So it has to be something that we bring, partially from our textual study back to our meditation and our practice. So we may say it's, at this stage, it's something you feel or intuit rather than something you study or assimilated from a list of ideas. So the Buddhist path was never meant to be something strictly studied in a classroom. It was always study and practice. So the text is reminding us that the practice component is also very important. What I like about this section is it is very hopeful. It is actually a very positive statement that as much as we struggle, as much as we recognize the different obstacles that we have in life, those obstacles are all opportunities to trigger awakening. Sometimes when we see them in more depth, sometimes when we experience them more deeply, sometimes when we recognize the suffering and pain of others, we're able to, at that moment, trigger a change in ourselves. Sometimes we read stories about this. Someone's on one side of a event or spectrum of ideas, and their confrontation with someone on the other side radically changes them. It wasn't uncommon. I think it's still not uncommon sometimes when people see great tragedy, they have a religious experience. They have a deep insight into how precious life is. You'll hear this often for people who nearly died and nearly lost their life, and they go on to say they move forward living their life differently. So there's, I think, a lot of different ways that we can look at it, but the part I like about this section so much is just how positive that can be. If you're a person who has a lot of obstacles or has feels like there's been a lot of suffering, this part of the awakening of faith is saying all of those experiences are in fact doorways through which your true nature can emerge. So I think without them, it's difficult to understand the teaching. If things have been too easy, sometimes it's difficult to understand the teaching. With a little sweat and grit and skin knees and falling down and bruises and whatnot, we have better insight into what's talked about here. Okay. So are there any questions on this part of the awakening of faith? Yes.
I'm pretty fascinated by the permeation idea, because the description, a lot of times I don't think I'm getting much anywhere, and then suddenly I realize that I'm no longer angry at whatever, fill in the blank, that I was very much had a giant opinion about. And in fact, I actually have a lot of compassion for whoever it was I was angry with. So I don't necessarily want to go hug them or anything, but it doesn't come on. It doesn't come on like, it's just like, I get up one day and there it is. I kind of like it though.
Yeah, I would say it sneaks up on you. And so you may not recognize that there's been some big change, and then you confront some situation or person that is very difficult, and then you just find that your reaction is different. For me, it was I became snappier. So I remember distinctly things that I would have shrugged my shoulders at younger, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's so touching." Oh, I was like, "Oh, what's happened?" So the kind of more rigid part of me softened. So that's one stage, and then um, other things that you may have had a faster reaction to. You definitely can see that space between um, seeing it and thinking, oh, I would normally react very strongly, and really recognizing that you have a choice not to react that way. And there's probably something for all of us that we couldn't have imagined not reacting strongly to.
Yeah, yeah, in the not reacting as we used to, then in the future, different things happen entirely then, because
Mhm.
that's no longer affecting it. So this passage really is quite positive. Right? Yeah.
These are they're relatively short, so there's a lot of tip of the hat to other sutras, including the Queen Shamala Devi Sutra. So talking about, it's one of the sutras that introduces the concept of the Buddha nature. And in that text, there's a passage that I don't remember the exact kind of quote translation, but something along the lines of um, the the Buddha nature is kind of going both ways. That there's a interpenetration of the uh, the Buddha mind or the Buddha nature with the current mind, and recognizing that is comes through our life experience in this practice, and without that, um, I guess without our life experience, we may not immediately be aware of it. So as someone who's seen a lot of suffering, I find it a very insightful and um, positive passage. And I think that message is there. Um, one of, so my opinion, totally, but one of the uh, things we have to keep in mind is every translator, every writer, every setting that the Dharma is communicated through, there's also a cultural lens, there's a cultural component. And for various reasons, a lot of these great masters really felt the urgency of the moment and did not want people to waste their lives. You didn't have all of the second chances that we have now with modern medicine and social structures. Your life could be ended for frivolous reasons for a variety of things. So they felt a very strong urgency. So sometimes their writings come across as very severe, and we may not resonate with it. But I think um, when we see this, we have to think of it like, don't waste your time. You know, or as my teacher would say, buckle down and study. Um, or as the teachers would tell all of us, if you learn the lesson like you learn those rap lyrics, you'd be brilliant. You'd be getting A on all your tests. But of course, something about those rap lyrics, the kids were more interested in than their lesson. Um, so I think it's communicated with um, deep affection for humanity, but as modern people, sometimes we take it or read it as someone talking down to us or preachy, and that might be something we push back against. But their intent, I think, was to wake people up. Don't waste time. Get on it. Work hard. Don't lose faith. Don't be lazy. Um, and in that sense, I think if we read it in um, like a kind parent or grandparent encouraging us, um, this is actually very positive. Because, and to keep in mind, we're going slow, but the lighter half of the book gets into practices and says what you should do. The beginning part is laying out the foundations for what is our predicament, so we can see it clearly, because it's not clear. We get sidetracked. We get enamored by the shiny things in the store window, and we forget. So it's a deeply encouraging. You know, Asvagosha took the time to write it, however many hundreds of years ago, and we're still reading it. And I think that if we recall back to the beginning, his reasons for writing and the invocation were quite sincere. So if we read it from that perspective, then it's even more hopeful, in my opinion. But I won't wag my finger and say that's not my style, so I won't do that. Any other questions or observations? Okay, so we'll do short meditation this evening. It's I know there's still a lot going on in the world. People are being affected in many different ways, and it is often difficult when we have so much going on to focus on high level philosophical concepts. So I've tried to keep our meditations a little bit more practical or guided. So we're going to continue on this evening in the same spirit. So this is going to be a body scan meditation just to help us get into a little bit more of a relaxed state and not neglect our body. We are encouraging everyone to be very aware of their health condition, and to do that partially for themselves, but also for others. So that'll be our practice for tonight. So part of this is going to be developing awareness for your body, but also your current moment that you find yourself in. Just getting a better feel and awareness for each passing moment, and having acceptance for what's happening within you, and allowing things to just be exactly how you find them, not trying to change or change the course of things when you come upon them, and really trying to let go of judgment and critical thoughts. It's something we're all prone to do. Just watching them arise and using the exercise to guide you as best you can to be an observer and not get actively involved in sort of this judgmental, critical thinking. So to start off, you just want to find a relaxed position in your chair, cushion. If you want, you can lie down. Main thing is you want to ensure that you're comfortable. Just let your eyes close. You can let your arms rest comfortably at your side or folded in your lap. Similarly, let your legs relax. First, just bring attention to the fact that you are breathing and not trying to control your breath in any way, but simply experiencing your breath as the air moves in and out of your body. Noticing your abdomen as it rises and falls. Just feeling the expansion in your abdomen and chest with your inhale. Feeling your belly deflate as you exhale. And just following that rhythmic movement of each breath. Rise and fall with your chest and belly with each inhale and exhale. As you exhale, just letting go and feeling your body become heavier as it sinks a little bit deeper into your chair or cushion. Just trying to bring your full attention to each breath in each moment. And we'll start by bringing your attention and awareness to your feet and just becoming aware of whatever sensations are there. If you don't register any sensations, just become aware that you are experiencing nothing. As you breathe in, try to draw your consciousness and awareness of your breathing moving all the way down into your feet. And as you exhale, try to bring the sensation that you're exhaling from the feet all the way through your body, up and out through your mouth or nose. So you're breathing in through your nose, and your exhale starts from your feet, moves all the way through. When you're ready, just let the feeling of your feet dissolve in your mind's eye, and just bring your awareness to your shins, calf muscles, just feeling the sensations in your lower legs, not just on the surface, but all the way through the muscles and bones, just So letting your body experience, become aware of whatever it is you encounter, sensations there. And similarly, breathing in through your nose all the way down to your calves and shins. And breathing out from your lower legs all the way through your body. Letting your attention, the shins and calves dissolve, and just bring your awareness and attention to your thighs, the back of your legs. Just taking note of whatever sensation you find. Again, breathing in all the way from your nose into your thighs, breathing out from your thighs all the way through your body. Next, letting the sensation of your thighs dissolve, moving your awareness into your pelvis. Just becoming aware of whatever sensations you find there. Just observing for a moment. Again, breathing in deeply through your nose all the way down to the pelvis. And allowing this part of your body to exhale all the way through your body. Perhaps noting how the breath is different in one hip than the other. Observing the sensation of weight and contact with your seat. Directing your breath deep into the pelvis. Exhaling all the way from the root up and out as you exhale. Just spending time there to give yourself a deeper sense of relaxation and stillness and awareness. Now direct your attention to your lower back. becoming aware of any tightness or tension you may be holding there. Breathing all the way from your nose down to your lower back. And on your out breath, just letting any tension or tightness that you're holding flow out through your nostrils. With your next inhale, move your awareness up the back. You might even feel your rib cage. Notice the expansion in the back as you breathe in. It's another area you may find tightness, fatigue, or discomfort. Just letting that dissolve as you exhale. And throughout breath, just allow any of that residual tension, fatigue to dissolve. Allow yourself to sink more deeply into stillness. And next, as you inhale, just bring your awareness to the belly. Just noting if you've been holding any tension in your abdomen, just relaxing. Feeling the movement of the diaphragm, which separates the lower abdomen from your chest. Breathing in deeply and feeling your breath in the belly. Moving your awareness into your chest. Experiencing the chest as it inflates on the inhale, deflates on the out breath. Perhaps becoming aware of your heartbeat. Noticing which side of the chest your heart is beating. Just holding in your awareness the sensation of your chest and belly as you breathe in. And on the exhale as you breathe out. Just letting that sensation dissolve as you bring your awareness to your fingertips. You may have both hands together, just becoming aware of the sensations, the tips of your fingers and thumbs. You may feel the pulsation of your blood flow, hands. may become aware of dampness or warmth. Whatever sensation you feel. You breathe in, just expand your awareness to your palms. Moving around to the backs of the hands and your wrists. The awareness of your breath and your hands and wrists, you may become again aware of your pulsation, of your heart. Just breathing all the way down to your wrists, hands, and fingertips. Bringing your awareness up to the forearms. You breathe into the forearms, becoming aware of your elbows. Just registering their sensations wherever they are. For your next inhale, allowing your field of awareness to include the upper arm and shoulders. Just noting if you have any sensation of tension in your shoulders. So letting that tension dissolve as you breathe out. Letting go of any residual tension in your arms, all the way down to your fingertips. And just sink deeper into the state of relaxation. Just being present in every moment. Letting go of whatever thoughts come up or whatever impulses to move you may be experiencing. Now bring your awareness and focus to your neck and throat, feeling this part of your body, experiencing what it feels like when you swallow and when you breathe. Letting that area relax and dissolve in your mind's eye. Breathing in and developing awareness of your face and jaw. Just experiencing them as they are. Becoming aware of your lips and mouth, your cheeks, your nose as your breath moves in and out. Bring your awareness to your nostrils and eyes, the entire region around your eyelids and eyebrows. Gaining awareness of the brow, relaxing it. let it soften. Exhaling out any stored emotion that you find there. Taking a moment to check in with your temples, see if you have any residual emotional tension stored there. And now letting your entire head and neck relax. Letting it be still and neutral, relaxed and at peace. Now letting your breath move through your entire body in whatever way feels natural for you. Through the entire length of your body, all of your muscles in a deep state of relaxation. Your mind simply aware of this energy. Simple awareness on the flow of breath. Just experiencing your entire body breathing. Sinking deeper and deeper into a state of stillness, deep relaxation. Allowing yourself to feel whole, in touch with the realm of silence and stillness. It's the awareness that the stillness is itself healing. Allowing the world to be just as it is, beyond your personal fears and concerns, beyond the tendency of your mind to want everything to be a certain way. Just seeing yourself as complete right now as you are. Breathing is part of the universe. Very slowly bring your awareness back to your body again, feeling the whole of it. You may want to wiggle your toes and fingers. Allow the calmness and centeredness to remain with you when you move. Taking some time to develop gratitude for the time spent, being aware of your body, nourishing yourself in this way. And try to remember this state of relaxation and clarity is accessible for you at any time, just simply by taking advantage of the awareness of your breath. No matter what's happening in your day-to-day life, no matter where you find yourself, your breath can be a source of strength and energy. It can be something you can rely on in the midst of crisis or emotional ups and downs. Namo Dai Shi Henjo Kongo. Namo Dai Shi Henjo Kongo. Namo Dai Shi Henjo Kongo. Take your time. The end of the meditation. As always, don't stand up right away. Be gentle, kind to yourself. After we disconnect, if you want to stay in this state, that's fine too. We went over a little bit, so I apologize, but we will have the movie discussion on Sunday. So you can look for the links online. Look forward to everyone joining us if you're able. And it was recommended by a friend. I think it's actually probably quite timely. So I look forward to as many people as possible taking part in the discussion. And as usual, stay safe, be well, and I hope to see all of you again next week. And I'm looking forward to the day when we can all see each other in person again. So, but I think regardless, we have a wonderful new tool now, so we will continue to be available live to all of our friends around the world also. So thank you. Have a good night. Good night.